Chinese Premier Li Keqiang arrived in Brussels, starting a 5-day tour after President Xi's Europe tour 2 weeks ago. After meeting the EU leaders in Belgium, Premier Li will later attend the 8th summit of China and Central and Eastern European countries in Croatia. What topics will be on the table this time? How has the Belt and Road Initiative landed in Europe? And what opportunities have been created under the 16+1 framework? To answer these questions and more, I'm very happy to be joined in our Beijing studio by Mr. Feng Zhongping, Vice President of the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations, and Professor Jeffrey Towson at Peking University. We shall also speak via satellite to Professor Job Toker at the American Graduate School in Paris, and Mr. Peter Clapp in Brussels, who is head of the Brussels office of Open Europe, a think tank, obviously. That's our topic. This is the dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to our studio discussion here, gentlemen. Now, someone said to me a few years earlier, Yang Rui, if you look at the roadmap of Chinese diplomacy, you just focus on the roadmap of China's leaders' overseas tours. And now this time around, at the beginning of 2019, one after another, President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Keqiang went to Brussels, the political heartland of continental Europe. So what do you make of the impact in generating such a roadmap by the Chinese authorities?
Okay, European Union is a special play in the world, on the world stage. President Xi's visit, I think, more focused on the bilateral relations. He chose Italy, France, to try to strengthen China's relations with these individual member states of the European Union. The I mentioned the European Union is a special actor, So we have to also focus on the European Union level. European Union institutions based in Brussels. So this is Premier Li's job. He's now in Brussels to talk with the European Union leaders, commissions, Commission leaders and European Council leaders. And then the second mission, I think, for his trip is going to Croatia to attend the 8th so-called 16+1 annual summit. So the focus of their two trips are different.
Are you suggesting that by visiting Brussels, the headquarters of the European Union, we lay more emphasis on the importance of multilateralism, and European politicians also share their principles about standing for multilateralism as opposed to unilateralism?
Very important demonstration. China has attached great importance on the European Union, on our relations with European countries, for two purposes, I think. Economic trade interest is always one. European Union with 28 countries, UK is still, inside the European Union. It is our #1 trading partner for continually 15 years. So this is no doubt about this. Secondly, increasingly more and more people have realized China and Europe are two important powers, two important forces in, counting unilateralism. The two powers, China, European Union, has realized this world is very important. If everybody working together, everybody thinks United Nations is very important, WTO is very important, but these institutions are based on, principally, based on the multilateralism, not unilateralism.
Jeffrey, business-wise, what kind of deliverables are we expecting to harvest this time around?
Right. Perhaps one of the big business stories of our time, maybe our lifetimes, is what we're seeing right now, which is China going global in every way, politically, at the government level, and at the business level, even at consumer level. Within that picture, there's BRI, there's 16+1, there's a lot of aspects to it, there's bilateral deals. But really, Chinese businesses increasingly going to Europe for the market, for investment, for trade. It's just growing in every dimension. And I think probably the U.S. situation has probably accelerated this relationship between China and the U.S. I'm sorry, China and Europe. So I think we could see some surprises in this trip, like we saw Italy sign up for the BRI recently. That came as a bit of a surprise to a lot of people, very important. We could see Chinese companies increasingly doing deals on their own. We could see the government. We could see a lot of big moves. I literally think almost every week at this point. If you talk to Xiaomi, they're focused on Europe right now. If you talk to some of the digital companies, they're all over. There's just like 100 degrees of this playing out right now. So this China-Europe axis has really accelerated, I think, in the last 6 months from what we've seen before.
Thank you very much for your insightful analysis. A very interesting thought on the growing importance between European Union and China, given the strained bilateral ties between Washington and Beijing. Let me go to our two guest speakers who are standing by in Europe, one in Paris, the other Brussels. Let me first of all talk to Jove Toka. Hello.
Hello.
Is it true that G7 is falling apart because of Italy, which signed up for BRI during President Xi Jinping's visit?
Well, I wouldn't say that Europe is falling apart, but I would say that this is once again a source for tensions and extra tensions in different ways. First of all, internally, you know that the overall situation of the European Union is far from being brilliant these days, with or without relation to the global aspects, such as the triangle between China, EU and America and its complications. Let me remind you that the tensions between members of the European Union are right now in sort of a heating up political atmosphere for objective reasons, which are long-standing, but also because of punctual reasons related to the elections to the European Parliament, which will take place in about 2 months towards the end of May. Should I add up the Brexit complications, rather the Brexit foggy overall situation? So I don't think that whatever has been signed in Italy 15 days ago, and this very impressive contracts regarding mainly the infrastructure works and the two huge harbors, ports of Genova and Trieste, per se, had introduced new elements. And don't forget that on top of everything, it was anticipated upon because of the long negotiations between China and Italy, and because of the particular political situation in Italy. As you know, it's a very awkward type of government in Rome right now, actually putting together the extreme left and the extreme right, if I want to find a short sort of definition, and it's looked upon by most other European Union members as sort of a strange political animal.
Thank you very much. Let me go to Peter Clapp, head of the Brussels office of Open Europe. Hello, Peter.
Hello.
It seems politicians in European Union have been following the 16+1 mechanism with a strong mixed feeling. Can you tell us why?
Well, European countries don't really like these kind of approaches, whereby China is only dealing with some European countries, especially at the EU level. There's some unease. Many people fear that China is trying to issue loans to these countries in order to then, on the long term, increase its political leverage over them. So that's sort of the background of all of this.
Well, this might be a little bit debatable for the Chinese, because China would never ever do anything to divide and rule the regional bloc of European Union. And the Chinese side says over and over that anything that happens between the 16 Central Eastern European countries and China will take place within the framework of laws and regulations of Brussels. Yes. But what are the benefits that China could harvest from such a mechanism?
Okay, I think we should understand the initiative comes from both sides. From the very beginning. 2012 is the starting point. You know, it's not just China's initiative. It's actually an interaction to create this mechanism. So we must understand this is mostly Central Eastern European countries' approach. Okay, come back to the question. What is Chinese intention? China thinks, you know, these countries are part of the European Union. European Union with 28 countries is a big group. You know, you have to have a close relations with this whole group. You have to do this one by one.
We
So,
start easier.
yes, starting either part. So at the very beginning, we call China's relations with these 16 countries like just bilateral relations between China and France. China with Germany, which has no any difference. Gradually, I must say this, we have realized, the concerns expressed by Germany, especially Brussels as well. Then you are right. China keeps on telling European countries, we have no hide agenda at all. We will do everything according to European regulations and law. I expect Premier Li Keqiang will do the same thing this time.
Let me go back to Peter Clapp for further comments on the 16+1 mechanism. Hello, Peter. Concerns of Brussels aside, what do you think of the incentive and driving force behind the 16 countries which are getting close to China very quickly? Is that only for the sake of infrastructure and the BRI? What are the major reasons?
Well, of course, China is a growing economic power, and these countries are rightly looking for investment. One of the questions is whether Greece will also join the initiative. Now, I think China can simply reassure these countries that it is not having any covert political goals, that it is generally only trying to help them with investments. Of course, ideally investments by private Chinese companies. Whenever you have public investment, it gets a lot more tricky and complicated, also economically much more suboptimal. But in itself, I think it's wonderful that you have more trade between China and the world. So also these places could definitely profit in principle. So I think it's important that we do not get to a situation where any side can use these interventions and can say, look, this is a reason for us not to be open to China. Because protectionism will not help us, of course.
Thank you very much. Can I talk to Jove Toka, who's standing by in Paris? Hello, Jove. With regard to the issue of a Belt and Road Initiative, it reminds me of what the Prime Minister May said during her visit to China. She said, of course, BRI is important, but we need to promote transparency of BRI. What did she mean?
That is an echo to a long list of sometimes tensions, sometimes unclear intentions, sometimes unholy interpretations regarding the overall questions which Europeans ask themselves, which is, what is China really up to? Now, you find it on both sides of the barrier of this argument, but you still have in Europe these days, because of the distance, because of the difference in political systems between West Europe and Europe as a whole and China, because of history, because of civilizational type reasons, a lot of suspicion regarding the long-run intentions of China. I just have in mind, for example, a declaration which the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Chao had made recently, actually spelling things out and saying, listen, what we would like to do with the Europeans, we, the Chinese, would like to do with the Europeans is not going to divide the European zone. On the contrary, it may very well unite it further. Now, the advantage of such a declaration, of course, in terms of European ears, in terms of the way Europeans hear and perceive it, is that things are being spelled out, because the suspicions regarding what's there eventually on the back mind of the Chinese is being said. But objectively speaking, on top of the fact that the overall economic and political situation of the European Union is far from being on a top situation right now, and then comes the Chinese giant from the other side of the world and proposes very lucrative type of attractions and pretends it is not in the logic of domination. So this is where the European debate splits into more faith and good faith in terms of reading the Chinese intentions than they are on ground value, or more suspicious way of interpreting them.
Mr. Feng, despite the growing level of discomfort on the European side about the alleged Chinese assertiveness, what do you think of Chinese concerns about A, Europe-centric views, and B, American exceptionalism? Because in the first 3 decades of China's opening up, China developed our economy with a sense of humility, and we thought that we were backward, we need to do a lot to catch up. But today, with the rapid expansion of our investment and growing stakes around the world, China comes across as a more confident member in the rich club of either a G7 or whatever you name it, or OECD. So Europeans feel uncomfortable. Is that because of their patronizing attitudes, or what Jane Austen calls pride and prejudice?
Obviously, you know, I think they feel any power which is going to pass the way, you know. But once, you know, you feel uncomfortable. I think most of the European countries, you know, although they don't openly say this, they're thinking the pressure of, you know, growing up in another country. This is for sure. But also, I agree with our colleagues just, you know, made in the program. He made a very important point. I think, you know, suspicions, because of the distance, history, different civilization, different politicals. So anything China is doing, particularly, you know, rising influence in Europe, which, you know, add more suspicions. You know, even a same civilization country, which, you know, rising up, can have an important impact on other countries. But again, China is different for European countries. In this kind of United States as well, you have a different civilization, you have different political systems, so they have much more reasons, you know, to suspicious, to skeptical about your intentions.
The founding father of European integration, Jean Monnet, said much the same things with our philosophical scholar Confucius. We agree to disagree. We would like to have a common but differentiated perceptions about each other. Having said this, look at the true facts and figures about China. Per capita GDP of China is only a quarter of the European Union, and up to 600 million Chinese per capita would only be 2,000 euros. And that's way, way behind the average standard of Europeans. Why do Europeans still show their grave concerns about our catching up so quickly?
Yeah, I'm the American at the table, right? And we are not known for being humble. I'll speak for all of us for a moment. But, you know, most people in the U.S. don't believe maybe in humility, but you try and be polite. You try and be courteous. You try and be respectful. And I think that's the right posture for China. There's no reason to not be proud of what's going on. There's no reason for companies, which is where I operate. Most Chinese companies I know are very aggressive, as they should be. They're trying to be successful. They're trying to create new things. They're trying to expand. That's what you would want them to do. And maybe that comes across as a lack of humility on American companies, maybe Chinese perhaps. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Because we are good students of Wall Street greed.
Yeah,
stay hungry, stay...
I would say ambitious, which is not necessarily just an economic thing. It could be creating new technology. It could be creating things that impress people. Climate change. It could be a lot of things that would fall under that. You know, how Europe sees China is kind of an interesting dynamic, but you could point to the same dynamic between Europe and the U.S. There is this odd cultural, almost misalignment in how we both see the world. I'm far more comfortable in China than I am in France. I don't know why. I just feel like I get along easier.
But let me go back to Geoff Tokaf. It seems you have more interesting thoughts on the transatlantic relationship. Look at this. Since the end of the Second World War, economic might of the transatlantic alliance once accounted for 70%. Now it declines to 40% of the world's total. That's a lot. That's 30% less than since the end of the Second World War. What does that mean for the Indo-Pacific strategy? Because there is this quiet but dynamic shift of wealth and influence from the west to the east, from Europe to the Asia-Pacific region. Do you think Europeans feel worried?
Yes, I think so, because first of all, when changes are taking place and modifications are in the air, and the relative economic political situation is not particularly stable, you always worry. You prefer worry-some type interpretations or more securing ones. Our American colleague just 3 minutes ago mentioned the humble nature of the American nation. I'm glad to hear that, although I'm not sure what we're seeing on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean in Washington these last 2 years is characterized mainly by being humble, but I know that was not the intention of my colleague, isn't it? But this, in a way, sheds an extra light to the questions we dealt with sort of 5-10 minutes ago in our conversation, related to the type of suspicions that Europeans or Westerners, because I think to a large extent in America you can find the same overall structures of thought and suspicions regarding China in a way which would be rather similar to what you see in Europe. When you have not only the statistics you mentioned a few minutes ago regarding GDP and the average income, but also the potential, also the demography, also the level and speed in which tens of millions, hundreds of millions of Chinese consumers are gaining the so-called middle class and consuming. This is a huge potential which is really out of the question for Europeans or Americans for that matter to match, neither in the medium run nor in the long run. So we're speaking about long-range potential which adds up to the those suspicions we mentioned, whereas the Transatlantic alliance in its traditional decades since World War II and even through those last 2 years, which are sort of bizarre, has nothing to do with that. So we're speaking about different dimensions, and it is through those different dimensions that interpretations, suspicions, prejudice are entering in.
Thank you very much. Let me move to Mr. Peter Clapp. Peter, let's take a look at the reform of WTO. It has a lot to do with what we discussed earlier, multilateralism. However, despite the very warm and positive posture of politicians such as Mr. Xi Jinping and Angela Merkel, Juncker and Emmanuel Macron in Paris, the trilateral meeting turned out to be very warm, very impressive. However, no formal statement or joint declaration whatsoever was issued by the two sides during President Xi's visit regarding important issues such as WTO reform. Does it mean that the European allies would first of all turn to Washington, turn to President Trump for his agreement before any landmark agreements could be inked between the Chinese side and European Union?
Yes, you're right. We're not there yet. This is an ongoing negotiation. Of course, indeed, Europe is not going to abandon the US in this. The ties are very good with the United States, but of course that does not mean that we should not also have good ties between China and Europe. And indeed, American President Trump has always said he wants to end with a deal. Typically he makes a lot of noise, but then at the end he definitely wants a deal. I think what's very welcome in this respect is that China has just unilaterally cut some tariffs on consumer goods entering China. So this is very good for Chinese consumers, but also good for non-Chinese companies. And it's my sentiment that there's a lot of goodwill on all sides to try to make progress on this, because everyone seems to understand the importance of good trade ties. I think
but I'm afraid,
that
Peter,
it's
you've been
definitely
speaking
possible
about the
to
bush
update the rules.
with regard to the sensitive issue of China's status in the present World Economic Order. Do you still believe China is the biggest developing country, or it's already a highly developed economy? Because that has a lot to do with how to look at the potential this government subsidies for agricultural produce, the role the Chinese government plays in assisting industrialization, so on and so forth. Since Uruguay around, emerging markets are being regarded as, developing countries. The United States says that's over. That is over. So just very quick look at the status of China. Peter?
Well, I think any excuse really is good for China to abandon agricultural subsidies, because this is bad for the competitiveness of an agricultural sector. I mean, if you look at New Zealand, they cut all agricultural subsidies back in the 80s, and agricultural production tripled. So I predict if China would do the same, if China would liberalize its agriculture, it will be the best thing ever to happen for Chinese agriculture. And indeed, if the WTO rules could facilitate that by China being declared a developed economy, I mean, I would definitely welcome that. I think China is in many respects definitely on matching with the West. If you look at technology like mobile phones or something, very good products are coming from China. So at some point, indeed, there's no reason to keep exceptions existing.
Thank you very much,
at the WTO
Peter.
level.
A few years ago, former German ambassador Dr. Stanzel said in a public speech back at home, facing a big crowd about how to look at China, he said, in Beijing, you got the impression of being any of the cities in the first class world, I mean, in developed countries. But 40 or 50 miles away, you see a very different picture, like any of the cities in the sub-Saharan region. So China is quite diverse. What do you think of, the image and status of China regarding the reform of WTO?
Okay, this comes to a very important part of Premier Li's visit to Brussels. Actually, 2 weeks ago, just when President Xi arrived in Italy, on that day, European Union leaders are talking about how to deal with China, how to cope with the rising of China.
They issued a 10-point proposal, a document about China. Right?
And one important point made in this so-called 10-point action is China is, I quote, China is no longer, should not be regarded any longer as a developing countries. So this related to reciprocity issues between China and United States, China and European countries. And I got the impression, a lot of European companies complain about their access to China market, similar to that of the United States. The only difference is, they don't disagree with Donald Trump's type of approach,
the
launch a war.
protectionist approach.
Yes. So, developing country is a definition of this is going to be a very important topic between China and European countries.
Well, it seems that the European Union would always tend to a consultative approach, to sit down and talk with China, whilst the United States would always use not a carrot, but a big stick, if not gunboat policy, to force China to the negotiating table. Is that the major difference between the two sides across the Atlantic?
It is right now, but this is a unique this is a Donald Trump thing. But if you were to look at somewhere like Germany and China and the US and China, you would actually see fairly similar issues about technology, market access, investment. But clearly the approach is very, very different. Yes. One is consultative and one is a little more forceful. Yeah. But that's a very different scenario than, say, Poland.
Thank you so much. Obviously, this is a very debatable and topical issue. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.